This is part 2 of episode 2 of Stories of the Games We Play. In part 1, we discussed the fallout of Zone of Interest, Under the Skin, Sexy Teachers, and Oscar bait, as well as where Star Wars finds itself now. And this is what I said.
If you look at the talent that's involved in it, if you look at the costs, and if you look at like the resources that they have, you go, well, hold on a second. Why is this not congealing in the way that it should?
Get ready, for this is part 2, episode 2 of Stories of the Games We Play. Let's push start.
You mentioned that the only threat to Jedis might be like General Grievous or the Sith. But I put to you, sir, that there is a greater villain in the Star Wars universe that threatens the entire universe itself as well as the Jedi, and that is space witches.
3, 2, 1.
Yeah, you see, you're being very, very polite because, you know, it's not as if the people making the films, like even Hollywood, they enjoy good films. That's why they're in Hollywood, right? That is my opinion, just in terms of, you know, you have a compass of actually, I enjoy this is why I enjoy it. And, you know, it's not a mystery as to why certain things work well, why other things don't work well, right? And then when you try and gaslight people in terms of, you know, we don't know better or whatever the case is, right? It's insulting. One, you're like, okay, fine. So clearly, if you're not going to respect if you're not going to respect that fact that I have an emotional investment to this thing that you're now selling to me, then that's one thing. But then you double down, and then you keep going, and then you keep going, right? I mean, if you look at obviously the current what you call not backlash, but the current attitude towards Star Wars is that it's like you can't be that dense.
Yeah,
it's physically impossible. You cannot be that dense. But however, you know, it's right there in front of us because the sequels, like you mentioned, the talent was there, right?
Yeah, I mean, you got like Oscar Isaac, John Boyega, you've got Benicio del Toro that shows up at some point.
Dude, I was so offended by what was that? The first sequel.
The Force Awakens.
The Force Awakens. Because it wasn't just that, you know, I was disappointed. Like it was shit. It was just like there's no getting around this. It's like I cannot defend this. I cannot defend this. I cannot say to anybody, yeah, but then this part and it was like it wasn't even like no. Inside my heart, I'm like, yeah, I really didn't enjoy it, but I'm gonna pretend that I enjoyed it because I'm a Star Wars fan. No, man, like it was one of the clear times where I was just like, no, this is impossible for this to be this bad, right? Especially,
okay, I'm gonna play devil's advocate for just a second. So I recently rewatched them all with Melissa. She has never seen a Star Wars film in her life. Those sequel films were her firsts, right? And when she got to I told you about this, when she got to, it's The Last Jedi. Yeah, it's The Last Jedi. Within the first 20 minutes, she was like, put it off. Because she felt that as an audience, she was disrespected from her investment in the first film because she enjoyed the first film. And her entry point is both her and I love Adam Driver, right?
Right.
And, you know, she was like, Adam Driver's in this, put it on, let's go, right? And she was like, cool, I'm invested in the story you're telling because this is the first part of the story. If there's 3 of them, okay, cool. I'll take the setup, right? I'll take the, you know, in Christopher Nolan terms, I'll show you something ordinary. You know, if that first film is considered the ordinary something, cool. And then she watched the first 20 minutes of The Last Jedi and she was like, as soon as like Luke threw the lightsaber over his shoulder and then he was drinking like milk out of the titty, she was like, no, put it off. And then I think what happened was she was bored one of the days and didn't have anything else to watch. And we have this term called face entertainment, where basically it's just something you watch just when you kind of want to entertain your face and not have it go not have it go past your eyes. So she was like, look, I'm going to give The Last Jedi a chance. So she watches The Last Jedi. She's like, Benicio, interesting. And she kept asking me about Boyega, right? Because she was like, Finn is interesting. And I was like, yeah, knowing full well that his story doesn't go anywhere, but I don't want to spoil it for her. And she was like, I'm really rooting for Finn. And I'm like, oh man, you're going to get so heartbroken, but okay, let's go. Right? So she watches The Last Skywalker, and I keep quiet through the whole film. And I go, what do you think? And being someone that has never experienced the Star Wars film before, she goes, I actually liked it. And I go, oh, interesting. And this made me think, and this is my devil's advocate question to you, because you mentioned that sometimes when films have a child protagonist, you can't really get into it. I have that same problem with the Harry Potter series, simply because I wasn't of the age group it was targeted at. You know, Lord of the Rings was out at that time, and I was like, oh, this I can eat up. Yeah. I was that demographic. So my question to you is, do you think that you're the wrong audience for those sequels? Or do you think that that's an incorrect assumption?
No, incorrect assumption. And here's why, right? Because we obviously have a history and bias towards Star Wars with everything that's come before, right? Yes. We're like, okay, we love Star Wars because of everything they've created, and they've proven, you know, that actually this IP, this story, this world that they've created is worthwhile, right? You can invest in this in terms of emotionally, and run wild in your imagination as to why you enjoy it. And basically, when you're excited about something, you want to do more. You want to experience more of it, right? So I have that. Now, with people who have never experienced it, I'm not going to go out of my way to tell them, no, that this is shit. Don't watch it. If they watch it and enjoy it, that's them, and that's fine. I'm not going to get in the way of that. But for me, if they ask, nah, this is terrible, get lost. This is a piece of shite. If people have to go back, right? Let's say your first introduction is the sequels, and then you go back and you experience, maybe even 20% of why Star Wars is good, or why people think Star Wars is good. Maybe they'll have some more context as to why actually, people are responding in the way they are responding. It didn't become $1 billion franchise for no reason. It didn't just wake up one day and just like, yay, here's $1 billion. Star Wars is great, right? Because now those sequels was like, they had the hype train going on, and they had all that talent, and then, for whatever reason, they were like you said, everything that came before is invalid. That was how I felt, just in terms of that approach with the member berries, and then with The Force Awakens, it really, I'm just like, I'm not sure that I'm invested in this one either. And I watched it and I moved on, right? And then Last Jedi, right? You're like, but then what is this? What is this? I was so angry and annoyed by the last two of the sequels that I essentially wrote off a very talented director. Like, I still don't enjoy his work now, right? Rian Johnson, right? He did Looper. I'm like, amazing, right? He
phenomenal film.
Yeah, he did some episodes of Breaking Bad. I'm like, he's full steam ahead. And then Star Wars.
He did one of the episodes of Breaking Bad, which I thoroughly. It brought so much joy to me. So one of the episodes was the I think it's called The Fly or something like that. Which is my second favorite of the Rian Johnson sort of episodes. The other one is when Walter White buys the Dodge Charger. And they do this frenetic editing between his Charger and his son's car, where it's just, because that show is quite a how shall I say this? It's quite a nail-biting, white knuckle, edge of your seat type show, and that particular episode has so much joy in it.
Oh, you see, again, this is a very good point that you're making, because now, like, unanimously, maybe not unanimously, but let's say in general, 80% of the people who watch Breaking Bad will tell you, wow, the last human being that I saw get introduced to Breaking Bad for the first time, I saw this man for 2 weeks, right? Rearrange his life so he could watch this show. Racing home early, staying up late. He had things to do. He was busy. He was in no position to be binge watching this show. But he did. He's like, no, I have to get through this. I have to finish this. I want to know what happens next. And he had the whole 6 seasons. So I'm like, you are in for a treat. And it was so fascinating watching that. And obviously now after it was finished, a bit of withdrawal and then elation that he had watched something like this. It was that good. It is that good, right? Now, Star Wars is a similar attraction. We can't compare the two. But when people go, I like Star Wars, you're like, I understand you like Star Wars, right? This is my personal opinion, obviously. And then you get to the sequels and you're like, nope. Now, nobody's going to say that about Star Wars. The sequels, nobody's going to say that about Star Wars, right? And even if you have a talented person helming the project and you've got talented people in it, you're just like, nope, there's no bueno here. There's no ways that you can present this and expect a good response. Yeah, maybe you can trick the new modern audiences, because that's the social rhetoric when it comes to, we're creating it for a new audience, for people who haven't experienced it yet. No, they must start at the beginning, the end. Oh, why now you come up with these weird things? But that's the Hollywood thing, right? Where when it comes to franchises, they dare not stray from the member berries, right? They will raisin dry those things that you love.
Yeah.
And then it's like,
as opposed to engorge them.
Yeah, and they don't have to do a lot, and you're just like, I don't understand. Like, you've got the capital, but you're like, okay, if it's going to be weird like that, fine. So you step back, you detract from it. You're just like, you know what? If people enjoy this, then let them enjoy this, but I will not be a part of this. And something weird happens after that, right? Because obviously it was the acquisition of Lucasfilm, and then the sequels happened, and you're like, okay, I don't really care what happens with Star Wars. Then Disney Plus happens, and you're like, okay, we're gonna get more Star Wars, fine, whatever the case is. And when I say something weird, I mean The Mandalorian, where you're just like, yo, here we go. Come on, here we go. This is it. Right? And, your engine starts revving. You're like, yes, we're about to go. And for whatever reason, Hollywood bullshit shows up again. And you're like, right? And now you're like, okay, I can't be doing this again. I'm not gonna invest in whatever's happening here, because now it's not just you. It's buzzing around the globe, just in terms of, hey, this is not good. This is not good, right?
So here's the point that I want to bring up, right? Because as much as I was playing devil's advocate before, because I think that, these are all sort of areas that both you and I love to explore, just as, sort of lovers of genre, but also at the same time as filmmakers ourselves, right? So James Cameron has this show called The Story of Science Fiction, right? This phenomenal little YouTube show. You can find it, right? In his episode where he interviews George Lucas, he said something to me which I was like, that's it. That's what Star Wars is. He said, okay, so, and this is in the context of just watching The Zone of Interest, right? And I knew we were going to talk about Star Wars on this episode, and I was watching The Zone of Interest with these lenses on as well. You see the Third Reich, you see the Nazis in that film. You look at the Empire's attire, right?
Right.
There are some synchronicities there, right?
Right.
But in the story of science fiction, James Cameron says this to George Lucas. He goes, hold on. So the rebels are fighting the Imperial Empire, right?
Right.
So he goes, yes. So he says, is it fair to say that in a modern context, the rebels are the Mujahideen from the Middle East going up against America? And George Lucas kind of fumbles around this and he goes, well, look, I was basing it more on the Viet Cong, right? The Viet Cong going up against the Americans. But if you look at it within that context, right? Resistance fighters going up against an overarching empire, and you put it into modern context, the problem with the sequels is that they haven't cut their teeth on that story element. What you're seeing is a Disneyfication of Star Wars where it doesn't have that grit anymore. It doesn't have that creative friction. It doesn't have that medicine with the sugar. It's just all sugar all the time.
Yeah.
And even if you look at it,
continue, sorry.
Just to finish this point, even if you look at the evolution of characters like Finn or like Poe, right, who are played by Oscar Isaacs and John Boyega, and even Adam Driver's character, even if you watch The Force Awakens, right, and you say, okay, great, these are the rules that you're playing with. You're introducing a new rule set. It's like when you were kids and you said the floor is lava and you're like, okay, cool. There were too many different elements here because, the clouds became lightning and whatever. Let's reset. Even if you judge those sequels by the rule set established in The Force Awakens, the problem that I see arises in addition to this quote by James Cameron is the fact that it doesn't play even by its own rule set. A good example of this is General Hux, right, played by Domhnall Gleeson. In the first film, he's this like ultra Nazi, like, he's making that huge speech on the weapon plant, right?
Yeah.
Where he's like, they will taste the fury of the Empire. And then you fast forward to the third film and he's like, I am the spy. You're like, hold on a second. But you had to use a phrase from last week, you were blood drunk in the first film, and now you're conveniently the spy in the second film. And it's the problem is that it's to your point that they took a stance of we know better and we know Star Wars better than the audience, not realizing that the audience has had 40 years to kind of investigate this mythos. And to use a bit of a crass metaphor here or illustration, is as if they were saying, you should be happy for this money shot, so sit on your knees and take it. As we splooge all over you with what we think is Star Wars. And I think that for me was a bitter taste, because you and I met straight after The Last Jedi came out, and I felt like Rian Johnson, and maybe this is unfair just to put it on his plate, but I felt like he did take a kind of big steaming pile of shit on Star Wars.
He did.
Apology. Yeah.
He's a betrayer. That's what he is. Like, I felt betrayed. Right? And this is my point. To add to what we're talking about, and to be a little meta, because now you mentioned George Lucas and his theory on Star Wars, where the rebels versus the Empire, right? Where if you look at it this way, right? There's a certain group of fans that have essentially become rebels fighting Disney and saying, no, you as the Empire are wrong. We will stand up to your bullshit. We will call you out on your bullshit. And we will stand here on this hill, either die on it or you will, right? Because if you look at obviously all the social commentary on where Disney Star Wars is now and how much just voicing that opinion in an honest way, right? It gains a lot of support, because I remember The Mandalorian made me feel like, okay, there's that magic again, because it was something new and interesting, right? It wasn't necessarily that Skywalker nonsense that they just basically, like you said, they did it greasy, right? That was not right. It was, okay, all right, let's see where this is going. And for whatever reason, it's like as soon as Disney noticed that, they were like, yeah, we gotta take that down. We gotta shut that down right now. We can't have people enjoying this. It doesn't make any sense.
Do you think that was their approach, or did they want to capitalize on something that was working because they had so many things that wasn't? Because look, I haven't watched. Is it Alderaan? What is the good series? Andor, sorry. So I haven't watched it, but I believe that Tony Gilroy is responsible for that.
Fantastic.
Phenomenal director. But I avoided it because this was after season 3 of The Mandalorian and the Book of Boba Fett. And I was just like, I can't do this to myself. It's cruel. And it's cruel and unusual punishment.
You're right. Because what happened with me was same thing, but it was season 2. After season 2 of Mandalorian, I didn't feel like I wanted to go into season 3, and I still haven't seen season 3 of The Mandalorian. I was like, well,
you're not missing much, to be honest. There's a lot of.
This is my point, right? It's kind of like you can smell it even beforehand. It's like what from season 1 to 2. There was an office, and then obviously there was the office politics that happened. With The Mandalorian, and then I remember waiting. So the in between The Mandalorian season 3, waiting for that, there was Boba Fett, and that I didn't finish. I was just like, "Whoop, I'll do this later," right? And then what was the ones that came after that? Obi-Wan. I was just like, I think the first 10 minutes of Obi-Wan, I was like, it's the damn teddy bear shit again. Right, but there was no teddy bears in it. But I was just like, no, this is not serious, right?
Yeah.
So skip that. What was the series after that? Doesn't matter at this point. I'm not interested in Disney Plus shows. So if ever I get bored, then I'll watch it, right? And then at least I'll have something to watch. That was my thinking then. Andor gets released, and I watched the first episode, and I was like, okay, cool. I'll wait for it to finish, and then we'll see what happens. But something happened, and I think I waited quite a while before I watched Andor. And then somebody said, yeah, but you must watch Andor. I'm like, yeah, I've watched Andor. No, wait, I've only seen the first episode of Andor. And then they repeated that phrase. Yeah, you must watch Andor. I'm like, okay, there's something there. They didn't say watch Boba Fett. They didn't say watch The Mandalorian season 3. They didn't say watch Obi-Wan. They said watch Andor. And I watched Andor. And I was back. Right? I was back. And I was like, okay, there's something to cling on to. Even briefly. It doesn't mean that the whole thing is going to get better. This I knew ahead of time. I'm like, no. This little piece here, very good. Enjoy it. Because what came after Andor was there's no coming back from that, in my opinion.
Okay, so we're gonna jump to that in a second. My question being is that when you brought up Knights of the Old Republic, you talked about this idea of seeing yourself in Star Wars, right? Character creation in Star Wars and the role that you played in a role-playing game. And oftentimes we use this type of game theory in order to kind of talk about life, right? What video games teaches us about life and how, for instance, the roles we play define essentially how we see those worlds. And also at the same time, you've had 40 years of this mythology, and you've had people interacting with these different mediums. Some of my favorites was like the Republic Commando, Star Wars Jedi 1 and 2. Even things like, I was fascinated by, what is the one where you play a Starkiller? I have to just kind of pull this up real quick as we're talking. But that kind of gave us, sort of the likes of I just need to take a look real quick. Because there's a dude that plays Starkiller, and I remember this was the first time I ever saw him, and he's this great Star Wars nut. So let me just take a second. Sam Witwer, right? He also shows up in The Mist with Thomas Jane. But the first time I ever saw him was in the Star Wars The Force Unleashed video games. They were poorly reviewed, but there were certain scenes in there which I thought were phenomenal. He plays kind of like this apprentice to Darth Vader, right, who turns to the dark side. And there's one particular trailer where he brings down like what is it? What are those big ships called in Star Wars?
I played this game.
Yeah. He brings down the Star Destroyer, right?
Yeah.
He brings it down in one of these things, and I was like, these types of imagery are so burnt into my brain, along with the likes of Republic Commando, likes with Rogue Squadron, which I really enjoyed, even with the 2001 game, which was, I think it was like some sort of pod racer game, if I'm not mistaken, that I remember was launched with the PlayStation 2, right? So we have a stake in Star Wars, right, as geekdom, if you want to call it that, right?
Yeah.
And we have a history with it. And if you look at Tony Gilroy on Andor, and if you look at Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni with The Mandalorian, you're seeing a trend here which I don't think they're following. And I think that this might be the fix. And I really want to get your opinion on this before we get into the Acolyte, right? My opinion is the issue with both Marvel and with Disney Star Wars is that you have writers with no life experience. Coming back to that James Cameron quote and the George Lucas thing about the Viet Cong, he was injecting something which he was growing up in sort of a post-communist world, where the commie threat was very real, but also at the same time, the Berlin Wall was coming down. You have the aftermath of Vietnam vets coming back, the failures of Vietnam, the horrors of what America did in Vietnam, the false flag that caused it all. So you have this conscientiousness that's taking place in the 70s when Star Wars is really kind of being formulated. And you also had the execs that could see this type of brilliance in writer-directors, or writers at least that had life experience. And if you look at all the films that we enjoy, they're often written by people that are sometimes in their late 30s, mid 40s, 50s, 60s, those types of things. And do you think that it's because Star Wars is being written by sort of college kid graduate yuppies who come from, these types of establishments that you're getting this type of poor commentary through the modicum of Blockbuster films?
No, because you have maybe 4 or 5 experienced human beings and experienced writers deliver projects, and those projects get turned down. Why? And now you're on a deadline. The budget, right? It's moving. It has to move. It's not as if you can stop everything. So now you're forced to use the college kids. And you're like, why? How did you get to this point? What is the end goal here? You started with the people that you know are capable, right? And then eventually a lot of them just walk away, right? With a lot of, like creative differences, things like that. It's either they walk away or, they're fired, and you're like, how is this making any sense to you?
Yeah.
Right. And obviously we're not privy to, those conversations, that development process, just in terms of like what is actually good and what isn't good. But at this point, it doesn't matter, right? Because you set one of the corners of the house on fire, but it's going to reach the ceiling. And when the fire hits the ceiling, that whole house is coming down. So even with Favreau and Tony Gilroy, because the rumors are there just in terms of what if Tony Gilroy takes over, right? just in terms of somebody has to kind of correct the ship. Number one, does he want to do that? Because Ando's interesting in itself because of his experience, or whatever the case is. However, the rest of Star Wars, who wants to do that now? I think that's what they've done. They've kind of put, there's a stink there that, was just kind of like, your dollars might be nice, but I might actually regret it. As opposed to, I understand why Johnson would want to do it. I'm like, great opportunity, money's good, and they kind of gave him free reign. But now, who in their sane mind would say yes to these things? And funny enough, because Andor was one of those series as well that kind of was, it wasn't pegged to be good, right? Because you obviously have Rogue One with this character, that's the loss you see of this character. So, what's the point of watching the prequel to that? Yeah. And then you watch the prequel and you're like, what happened? What's going on? Like, how is it at this level? And you're like, okay. Again, appreciate that. And then looking at everything else, you're like, nah, it's I don't see it coming back. I don't see the fix. And I can't even blame the college yuppies. I can't. I'm like, they're going to get the flack. Yes. They're going to look back at this and be like, wow, we did that to Star Wars. Right? Especially after life experience. Then you get what is obviously, what's trending right now, the Akoshite.
I was about to ask you because, look, I've avoided the Acolyte. I saw a couple of ads for it, and I've stayed away from Disney Plus shows since Obi-Wan, since Mandalorian 3, because I think I watched like 3 episodes of Obi-Wan and I was like, no, McGregor, you shouldn't have come back for this, because again, it's filled with member berries, which are, sprinkled in between the compost, that they're forcing you to eat. And I remember the Acolyte came up and I was like, oh, interesting. This is going to be like this Jedi serial killer type of show. And I was like, I'm fascinated by the premise. And then I saw the trailers for it. And just by the look of it, I literally turned into a vampire that saw garlic. I was just like, I ran and jumped into a coffin.
That's very interesting. Usually, the way I sense a good product is obviously if the hype train, right? I easily get hyped. So when the hype train is coming, I've got my ticket, and it's either I'm there on time or I'm just like, nah, I'll catch the next one. And with this one in particular, there was no hype train. It was more it was what do you call it? What do you call where you dump your scrap? It was a scrap yard, right?
Yeah,
it was like
it's a fire sale.
Yeah. It's like you're trying to sell, fruits and veggies outside a scrap yard, right? Mm. Where it's like this has got nothing to do with the show, but all the BS behind the show, right? And just from the commentary from certain what you call them. YouTubers, influencers, those guys, right? Yeah. It's just like, oh man, this is not good. Like, they're talking about how bad it is before it's even gone into production.
Yeah.
And you're like, yeah, I'm only curious as to see like where this goes, right? It's like, okay, it's not going to be good. Fine, whatever. Fast forward to when obviously now it's time to release the show, and these guys are firing on all cylinders. They have been they have been frothing at the mouth like, yes, it's gonna be shit. We are right. Come on, let's go. They're not even worried about what numbers is gonna come up when they roll the dice. They know. Right. And the show releases, and like you, I'm like, I'm not gonna. Why? Like, why would I bother? Unless some sort of miracle happens, and they're like, well, actually, we were proven wrong, or something like that. But that was not the case. It got even worse. I'm like, impossible. So I did not watch it. What happened was, every week an episode would come out. The Critical Drinker, Nerdrotic, Star Wars Theory. I think four other YouTubers would give like breakdowns on the episode, right? And just from episode 1, you're like, wait a minute. They can't be serious. This is a $180 million show. You can't be serious, right? There's a guy called Chris Gore.
Yes, I know Chris Gore.
Yeah. So he was hinting at, your episode 3. I'm like, okay, now you're basically clickbaiting on their behalf, in my opinion, right? Just don't talk about it, right? So that if it's that bad, just don't talk about it. But they spoke about it, so I'm like, okay, I'll just wait for their opinion. And every single episode that was released, I'm having a good old time. I'm not watching The Acolyte. I'm watching the recaps of the episodes from these guys.
Yeah.
That was highly more entertaining than the show, right? And so I'm like, okay, fine, I had my fun. These guys will continue doing what they're doing. And then you sent the video earlier today, right?
Yeah.
This guy's neutral. And holy shit, it is bad.
So we're obviously referring to the sort of case study that Mento did on The Acolyte. What made it the most hated Star Wars show, or hated TV show? Which was it? I can't remember.
Yes. Filmmaker.
One of the two.
Right?
Yeah, Filmmaker. Yeah.
Filmmaker. Okay. Yes. Which is interesting because he's obviously got this intellectual stance to it, and he's explaining why it's bad. But you just look at it and you're like, I don't know if you saw anything from Echo, another Disney Plus show.
I watched the first episode of Echo, and I could not for the life of me. I think I watched up till when Charlie Cox showed up, because I think that's the only reason that I wanted to watch it, because I really love the Daredevil show. But he showed up, and I was like, okay. It was tough. It also felt very fire sale. Very fire sale-y, if that's even a word, where I just felt like they were just kind of trying to get rid of it, so they just kind of dumped it somewhere.
Yeah, no. It felt unprofessional the whole way through. It was just, it was like, when you have a family, boys and a girl, right? And the boy's playing with his friends, having a good old time, and the daughter throws a tantrum, and then the parents force the boys to play with the sister, right? It's like that, except now with this one, it wasn't just include your sister into the game. It was, no, she's in charge now. You listen to what she says.
Okay, so I want to ask you a question. You mentioned Nerdrotic, The Critical Drinker, Star Wars Theory. That's correct?
Correct.
What do you say to the opinions that say that those channels are bigoted and somewhat racist and sexist?
Why do we have to engage in that? It's nonsense.
Yeah. The reason I ask is because you make a good point about, sort of the analogy that you just used in terms of, sort of the daughter being in charge. We started this conversation talking about haven't we evolved in 70 years from the Third Reich. And there was a time during the 90s in terms of cinema and even in terms of video games and sort of the early 2000s where I had actually felt that, we were past a lot of sort of, how shall I say this, a lot of tokenism in film, where, we had gotten to a good mean point. It was like the era of the Last Boy Scouts. It was the era of, things like Lethal Weapon. Lawrence Fishburne was Morpheus. And we weren't talking about, those characters' blackness or those characters' uniqueness, or those characters' appearances, or even their sexual inclinations. Because that would be reductive from a storytelling perspective, because no one's out there saying, I'm a heterosexual, right? Like, no character is making that claim in a movie. And I think that often when you make these discourses about characters and the way that which you define them is by where they put their private parts, it starts becoming weird. But in addition to that, essentially, which we mentioned tribe last week, which tribe they fall into. And what I feel like these pieces of content ultimately do is that they otherize these points of focus, these groups of focus, in such a way that they actually create more alienation and more ostracization than if you actually didn't do that in the first place.
Yeah.
Because for me, like a good example with Echo, one of the mechanics that they use in Echo is that they drop out the sound completely. Because they were like, you're supposed to feel like what it feels like to be deaf. And it's like, we have an imagination. I grew up watching that lawyer show where it was about the deaf lawyer. Like, don't worry, I've got a how shall I say this? I've got a point of entry, but I also have a point of understanding. You're not, like I said, you're not speaking to someone who's on their knees waiting for you to kind of explode with your golden wisdom all over them. You're speaking to somebody that has a history with various forms of entertainment, particularly the genre and particularly the mythology of what you're trying to elaborate upon.
They were not trying to elaborate at all.
But this is the problem that I'm starting to see is that you're starting to see people put themselves into the mythology at the disadvantage of the general fandom, right? And I understand that they want to kind of go for diversity, but the problem is that it doesn't carry the banner of diversity. It only burns it. Every single time I've seen this happen, and particularly I saw this happening in the sequel films as well, which is, when they hired John Boyega, and if you ever hear him talk about it, how he kind of got screwed by Disney and Star Wars, is that when J.J. Abrams met with him in, sort of in the UK somewhere, he took his last money that he had in order to actually catch a cab to the meeting and then kind of walked back home. But in that meeting, JJ said to him, "You're going to be one of the leads of the new Star Wars." And to be honest, if you watch The Force Awakens, it kind of sets that up. To be honest,
we all thought that.
There's a couple of things that happen. When The Force Awakens, for instance, the very opening sequence, where Adam Driver's Kylo Ren notices Finn, right? And he senses something in him.
Dude.
You're like, oh, interesting. It's not going to be a Skywalker story. This is going to use the context of a Skywalker story to tell a completely new story.
Dude.
And you're like, oh, I'm fascinated by that. And you're introduced to Oscar Isaac, and I'm not going to waffle on about that or anything like that. But then what happens is it's so interesting. I felt like they wanted to force feed you a hero as opposed to listen to the audience. So what happens is that you're championing Finn, right?
Yeah.
And then they introduce Daisy Ridley, and you're like, fine, cool. I don't mind Rey. I don't mind this person in terms of, even if you make the argument that she's a Mary Sue, I don't care.
Yeah.
Right? It's fine for the context of the film. They introduce you to Adam Driver, who's just firing on all modes, and in actual fact becomes the MVP of that series, who really starts to carry that sequel film. Because anytime he's on screen, he's doing fascinating things. And you're like, oh, he's such an interesting villain, right?
Interesting, that's a very good word.
Yeah, and the thing that happens is, remember they introduced, what is her name? Gwendolyn Christie. She plays the Golden Stormtrooper, right?
Yeah.
and they're like, "This is going to be the new Boba Fett." This is what they said, right? They try to make it the coolest thing since sliced bread. But the problem that happens is Mr. Trader shows up. Remember the stormtrooper with the little like shock stick?
Oh,
and
yes.
automatically audiences were like, "That's Boba Fett." Gwendolyn Christie, as much as I love her, I'm sorry, but the person you're trying to force feed us as the new Boba Fett is not Boba Fett, because even if you look at the original Star Wars, it wasn't George Lucas who made Boba Fett, it was the audience. Because if you look at the Return of the Jedi, Boba Fett gets like offed within the first few seconds, and it was really people's imaginations that took this bounty hunter and added to this mythology of him and turned him into that character. But then again, they don't listen, right? So you get the trader thing, and then they double down on Gwendolyn Christie, right? They have Finn face her, and that becomes Finn's ultimate foe, and you're like, but it's not earned. It's not earned in any way. And even to the point that the ending of The Force Awakens, with the killing of Han Solo, etc., you think that when that lightsaber starts to rattle, it's going to be Finn that grabs it.
Yep.
Right? Because I know a lot of people were like, oh, how cool would it be if it was Luke that had it? For me, within the context and the confines of the story they were telling, you know, even if I had to look at it with new eyes and I didn't know about Luke Skywalker, I would have wanted Finn to get that lightsaber, because it's like that shows that a force has awakened.
It was being teased the whole time, and they just essentially, when like
you drop the ball. Ultimately, is what it is. It's just like you have it in the pocket. You can see the shots, and then you go, you know what I'm going to do? I'm going to shoot the 8-ball, and I'm going to lose the game. And you're like, what? And you're like, everything's working. Everything's working. Just listen to what people are responding to. And I think the thing that they responded to was like, they looked at negative fan reaction and they interpreted it some weird way, which I thought was so strange. Sorry, that was just like my little rant.
No. That's absolutely fine.
Kind of diversity and those sort of things, because Finn's an interesting character, whether he was brown, black, blue, yellow, whatever it is. He's an interesting character. And the thing is that if you really want to champion diversity and representation, I think representation is a better word. I like representation because people need evocative archetypes to look up to in order for them to change their narrative as audience members. But if you really want to carry that banner of representation, like, do the characters better service, man. Because it's like, if you look at from the 90s to the 2000s to now, we've gone backwards. We've regressed as far as like female heroines and as far as like representation is concerned, because it feels like we're in this very weird, like the plantation's master's wife is the hero. And, because she has sex with Django, she's like, she's like with it. And we should buy into that story. And you're like, what? No.
I feel like a lot of the cast members and the people involved in Disney Star Wars now is like a kid going to school on Civi's Day, having told his friends that he's getting a pair of new Adidas, right? And he goes to school, but then the Adidas is only has the 2 stripes.
Yeah.
Right. Where now, it's like, nah, bruv. That's not Adidas. That's what's the word? Hong Kong bootleg.
Yeah.
Discount. Just cheap.
And that same kid has an opinion on Bella Hadid wearing the same Adidas.
Nah. Again, like, there's no excuses now. Right, and what's funny? They're still doubling down. They're still trying. They're like, no. This is okay. Maybe they're not gaslighting as much, just in terms of the stuff that they're producing is good, because they can't in their right minds say that. So whatever they're doing is just sad now. It's very disappointing. And I mean, that's just a TV series. If you look at what's this new one that's coming out? Outlaws.
Yeah.
Right? Obviously, it's also got its own DEI and politics and, you know, a little bit of noise on the internet. And I think it was a few days ago.
Yeah.
The first 10 minutes of gameplay was released. Right? And I kind of just stayed away from comments and things like that. But I was curious. I'm like, how bad can it be? Which is not a good question to ask. Right?
Especially on the internet.
Yeah. So let me just at the very least, not be that guy. Let me see what they are offering outside of what I've been hearing. And I watched the first 10 minutes of it, and I had this thought. This game looks like a game that I would play maybe a year after it's been released, after all the noise is quieted down, right? Whether it's good or not, that's yet to be seen. However, it's not at the point where it's like it's so terrible that it's unplayable, because there are certain other games as well that obviously have their issues. But you as a individual, as a player, you're like, I will play it for myself, even if other people don't like it. And then after I have my experience, then I can have an opinion, and from that opinion, then I can share it with people. There was a focus puller we worked with once upon a time, and he said something interesting about Cyberpunk 77, right? Because I had discovered there was a ton of gamers on set, so you know, we would sometimes get a lot of quiet on set because of some conversations.
Stories of the games we play.
Yeah. So we end up on Cyberpunk 77. He asked me if I've played it, and I said, no, I haven't played it yet. I'm waiting for all the nonsense to die down and waiting for the game to get fixed. I heard that there was a new patch, but then it was a big patch. So I'm like, I don't know. We'll see what happens. And he goes, no, what's nice about playing the game in its first iteration, right? Cyberpunk 77 is like, it's part of your experience when you play it. So even with the glitches, right? You can't have all this noise on the internet if they didn't experience that. So, you know, even with the mistakes, play it. Because if you think back to like PS1, PS2, right? Those games weren't perfect either, right? But we didn't make such a noise about, you know, those mistakes. You just play the game. And only many, many years later do you go, wow, how do people pass this level? Because it was broken. But people turn that those quirks of the games into their experience as well. And, you know, they birthed a lot of conversations and, you know, a lot of history and a lot of mythology for certain games. I was like, oh, wow. I nearly got caught up in that. Oh, Cyberpunk 77 is so bad. This is terrible. And as opposed to play it, right? And if it's so bad that you don't enjoy the game, then that's your experience. But he said, that's part of my experience. And I was like, oh, interesting. How many games do I do that with these days?
Yeah.
And, you know, I've got games that I'm like, I won't necessarily recommend, but I will play them for myself. And I think that this new Star Wars Outlaws looks like one of those games to me, where it's like, you know, let the game release. I'll give it a chance when I get a chance to play it. But I'm not gonna go do day one stuff. I'm not paying full price for that.
So there's a topic that I think that we should save for the next episode of Stories of the Games We Play, because you've just touched upon it now, bringing up Cyberpunk. So just in terms of sticking with the stories of the games we play, about 2 years ago, my cousin, who's a fine artist, a phenomenal fine artist, came to pay me a visit. And he had, the first thing he said to me upon arriving and coming through the gate, I said to him, wow, you're traveling light. And he says, yes, I only packed the thing that matters. I packed my PlayStation 5. And I was like, okay. And he said, you really have to check out Cyberpunk. And what I heard about Cyberpunk was the fact that it was buggy, right?
Yeah.
But it was made by Project Red, if I'm not mistaken, the same guys behind The Witcher.
Yes.
Right. So what is interesting is by this point, all the bugs were kind of ironed out. I was really fascinated by the inclusion of Keanu Reeves. But one thing that really took me, good sir, and this is to bring back the reason that I watched Under the Skin, is I watched him play it, and he encountered this character by the name of Panam.
Panam?
Panam, or something of the sort, right?
Okay.
And the first thing I said to him, I was like, oh, she's quite sexy. And he looked at me and he said, yeah. Mm-hmm. And he's like, you should see what you can do in this game. And I was like, sexy time? And he was like, yes, sexy time. And I was like, oh my goodness, the era of hot coffee has come back around. And he was like, yeah, you can develop romances in this game. And I was like so fascinated by this, because this is a little story that I'll save for next time, because the first time I encountered a game like this, it was called The Nomad Soul.
The Nomad Soul. I've never heard of that. Okay.
No, made by David Cage. And it is a game that stays near and dear to my heart. But it was one of those games where it transformed me in the way that I think, in the way that I write, in the way that I make movies. In fact, the next movie that I'm developing has a particular reference to the Nomad Soul. But this is a story that we will save for the next stories of the games we play. But in wrapping up, I would like for you to give me the luxury of sitting back and listening to you fix Star Wars. Given that they've just greenlit, or they're developing a new Daisy Ridley trilogy, and given that you have such a strong, sort of opinion on exactly what's right or wrong with it, and
that's still happening.
To be honest, I would love to see your Star Wars film. If you could do any Star Wars film, what would you do?
Any Star Wars film? What do you mean? Can you be more specific?
Like in terms of, if you had the chance to make a Mandalorian-esque type of Star Wars film, like an entry point, like in terms of the Mandalorian being a sort of bounty hunter type wolf and cub film within the Star Wars universe, what kind of film?
Oh, okay, all right. It's not fully fleshed out, but just off the top of my head, Knights of the Old Republic is a MMORPG, right?
That's right.
Right, and the original trailers for that game blew me away. I still have them somewhere, and I'll send you some links. And is
one of them like that crazy sort of like battle royale between a whole bunch of Jedis
and the Sith pop out of this container ship, and phenomenal. But there's two other trailers, and they introduce the type of character archetypes that you're able to play. So you got your Jedi, you've got your tanker, a stormtrooper clone type character, or that type build, and then you've got this cowboy hat wearing rogue type character, and he's wielding two guns, and that character for me speaks a lot. I mean, I obviously have a bias towards certain playstyles and certain character archetypes. However, I would focus on I like the smuggler ideas. This is probably why I'm a fan of Andor. I would start there for me, because a lot of the characters, so even with Star Wars Outlaws, right? I think I'm more intrigued by the fact that they're not a Jedi and they're not of the Empire, right?
Yeah.
Right. I think it's also why the Mandalorian is so appealing, because it's a different perspective. My thing is like, who else in the Star Wars world is like that? right? Remember, we were supposed to have what was that spin-off that Gina was supposed to get?
Rangers, something to that effect.
Yeah. Immediately when that was kind of whispered, there was interest, and there's still interest for that, right? Obviously, it would have to be a film, and I like that you asked it. Is it a film? Because in spite of everything that's happening with Disney, another Star Wars film would actually be very beneficial, as long as it's not a Daisy Ridley film. I'm sorry, that's just not going to work. It's not going to cut it. We're fatigued. I think if you're wise, then I suppose it will depend on the script. But at this point, their account is in arrears. They're not exactly ready. But I would have that character.
Yes.
Right, and obviously, how would he get involved in these type of dangerous situations? Because there's a scene in a Civil War trailer, in the Captain America Civil War.
Yes.
Right, where Iron Man opens the elevator, right? And it was the first time I was put on the other side, where the Avengers are the heroes, right? But as a criminal or as a villain or as an antagonist in the story, you don't realize actually how dangerous and scary, these type of characters are, right? Because I looked at Iron Man in that shot and I was like, I do not want to see that coming after me, right? If he's on your side, great, right? So I would need a character like that versus, let's say, a rogue type individual. But I wouldn't want it to be like a Jedi or a Sith. I think that would be the challenge, is to find a worthy adversary. I think General Grievous, he was very much like that, especially in the animations where the man, he's collecting lightsabers. And that is threatening, right? Even to a Jedi. And you always, there's a part of you that feels like the Jedi is actually very capable. And, it's always weird for me to see them get taken out, where it's just like, hey, that's a Jedi. He can do things. So I would need that type of setup, just in terms of somebody who's just going about their business. It doesn't have to be a smuggler, because I think obviously it's kind of played out. But to have that simple run-of-the-mill, living their life in a galaxy far, far away, and to have an adversary that isn't necessarily been trodden upon in terms of the mythology now, where the Sith, the Sith was supposed to be interesting. Throughout the series, they were supposed to be interesting. You mentioned Darth Maul, very interesting. Since then, the Sith have also kind of just been like, sidelined to be like this two-dimensional baddies. Can we say baddies?
Yeah.
I feel like baddies has been abused already. But yeah, so I would start with that trailer and then just work and let my brainstorming go from there.
You mentioned that the only threat to Jedis might be like a General Grievous or the Sith. But I put to you, sir, that there is a greater villain in the Star Wars universe that threatens the entire universe itself, as well as the Jedi, and that is space witches.
So we spoke about the zone of interest, and we ended with Star Wars, which I think is actually quite interesting because of the whole Rebels versus the Empire, and then one is very harrowing. So I think it'd be very interesting as well to have a harrowing Star Wars film, because that isn't there yet. Somebody's going to do it.
So if the zone of interest is on one side of the Blu-ray shelf and Star Wars is on the other side of the Blu-ray shelf, tell me what's in between and what is a recommendation that you have for me this week?
This week. I don't know about movies, but there's a certain television show and a certain game, because the television show inspired me to replay this game. So there's like these SUVs driving, and these police SUVs, and there's like a train right in the middle of the city, and there's smog, and there's a word that gets said in the television show, which kind of just made my day. The word is cousin, and the show is The Bear.
Oh, amazing. I would have hoped you picked up that reference. I was walking around today thinking, Charles is going to completely get the cousin thing.
No, yes. I was so giddy. Oh, man. Because I just started, so I'm in heaven with this thing. Yeah, I was like, oh, I heard it was good. Very good.
It is phenomenal. It is phenomenal. Which episode are you on?
Episode 3.
Oh, great. It only gets better from there.
Yeah.
If you can believe it. It only gets better from there. And then season 2 is just like a blitzkrieg in terms of just, I want to say cinematic goodness, but it's cinematic goodness. And it's just such a great gourmet meal that sits, right in the middle of the 2 titles that we spoke about today, where it is equal parts entertaining and equal parts medicine, and the sugar makes the medicine go down so good, man. And I love it. I'm craving season 3 of The Bear, but sir, I know for a fact that you have suggested something through to me. I actually have it open in front of me in the browser. I'm going to go check out Andor based on your recommendation.
Fantastic.
And I'll report back next week. This has been a hell of a ride, beginning in hell with the Zone of Interest. And it's been a ride. We've made it in 12 parsecs, and it's a ride that I only want to take with you, good sir. I will be the Wookiee to your Han Solo any day of the week, and I appreciate you.
Thank you, good sir.
That translates so well.
That's it for this week's Stories of the Games We Play. We hope that you enjoyed it. Please hit subscribe for more episodes as well as other interesting content. Here's to all the stories of the games we'll play.